This is our third lesson in our Winning with SketchUp for Landscape Design course. In this lesson, we are going to continue with some of the core concepts that we touched on in our last lesson and expand on them a little bit further and get into introducing a few new concepts and starting to tie everything again together and bring it back to landscape design and ultimately how we would use these techniques in our industry-specific things that we need to build and represent for our clients. So what I've done in this video is I set my webcam up to kind of focus on my keyboard shortcut hand. And on the Facebook page, we got a little bit into some discussion of keyboard shortcuts, and I went through and wrote down manually. It took me 2.5 hours to write down all of my keyboard shortcuts and go through and try to remember what they were one at a time. And I compiled a list of all of those keyboard shortcuts and threw that up there. If you didn't see that, it's in the Files section. So I went through all of these here. And the way that this works, and I talked about it a little bit in the beginner video and explained some of that, and I've talked about it in some of the previous videos, but this really helps to understand it when you look at how it's laid out. And what I did with this list is I started up at the very top and I worked my way to the bottom. So we have the F keys, and I use the F2 through the F8. I don't use F9, 10, 11, or 12 simply because they're a little bit too far to reach for me. I want to keep everything centralized. F1 is obviously help. And then I use you can't set keyboard shortcuts to the regular numbers without some kind of a preface in the Control, Shift, or Alt. Again, this is Windows. You'd apply the command to the Alt, I believe, on a Mac. But the numbers are obviously set for entering dimensions and measurements, but you can go Alt with the numbers, Shift with the numbers, Control with the numbers, and I utilize the little squiggly line on my keyboard next to the number 1, which has a name to it, but I can't remember what it is specifically. And I use the Alt 1, 2, 3, and 4 to do camera position and camera orientation, and that allows me to toggle back and forth very quickly between top view, parallel projection, top view, front view, left view, right view, parallel projection, on and off in every one of those views. So I can do that very quickly without looking, and helps me to kind of switch the camera if I need a different camera position. And then I also have zoom extents, which I can get to depending on what's selected, and then change the camera. But it helps to center things. So now when I'm orbiting, everything's in the center. And navigation is a big part of this whole speeding up your workflow as well, understanding that. So I use the number 5 key, Alt 5, Shift 5, and Control 5 all have similar functions, and 5 for me doesn't have any, I guess, connected value as far as the letter 5 and what it means is with hide. It does rhyme a little bit. I guess I never thought of that, but for me it's just the space where I can reach that finger with those combinations. And so depending on what I'm doing, I'm either using my pinky for Control and Shift and going to 5, or my thumb for Alt and going to 5. And I know that those, just from doing it so many times, that when I'm hiding and unhiding, and that most important one is that toggling of the rest of the model with my pinky on Control and then 5. So I'm just going to go through talking about these, and then I'm going to actually, I've created the plan view kind of version I extracted from what we built last week in the previous lesson, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to build everything again, but I'm just going to do it at full speed without talking and doing the narration, and have the webcam on my keyboard shortcut hand, so you can kind of follow along with what I'm doing with the keyboard shortcuts and the speed at which I can actually build this stuff. And it's not a way to show off either, by the way. It's a way to kind of understand the power of putting the time in as it applies back to your business and your workflow and your turnaround time. And ultimately, being able to squeeze more time into the threshold that you have to turn a design around and present that. So if you have sold a project, you've designed a project, you've scheduled 2 weeks until you have to present that project, well, what you can accomplish in that period of time, given the other things we need to do in business and seeing new clients and doing all that stuff, you're generally limited. You may have 15 hours to put into the 3D. You may have 20 hours to put into the 3D. You may have 5 hours to put into the 3D. But what you can actually squeeze into that given threshold of time will ultimately determine the quality on the other end. And that's what I try to make people understand is, a lot of times when they look at the work I do, they think about it in terms of how long it would take them to do it, and not being trained in the same way that I'm trained and having the dexterity and working on things in the same way that I've worked on things. So, it's relevant. All of that, the time and everything is relevant that we're putting into this keyboard shortcut idea and speeding up in our business as it relates to landscape and hardscape outdoor living design and presentation is what matters most. It's a very competitive industry. The clients will get go cold, if you will, emotionally, psychologically, very fast. So, all of this pays off for what we do. So going through these here, I did the numbers. Then I moved down to the next line. So we have that start of the QWERT on a QWERTY keyboard, which everybody has these days. So that's the top line under the numbers. And I mentioned this in the post, but I set Q to the line tool. And the thinking there was that it's probably the easiest here for my pinky to get to as I'm drawing. So I can pop back and forth, grab that, draw, hit the space bar, select something, change a measurement, and I'm right back to drawing with that again. So the WER being set to move, rotate, and scale, if you would ever use a different software in the industry, 3ds Max, Maya, pretty sure even Cinema 4D, even a lot of the smaller software, it's early on was established that move, rotate, and scale would be these W, E, and R, and they seem to be a universal shortcut in the industry, except SketchUp does it differently. So I've switched it to be more in line with the other software that I use and more in line with the industry software. And the thinking behind them being there is that they're easily accessible and they're the tools that you use most often in manipulating whatever you have selected. So you're either going to move it, rotate it, or scale it, and those need to be keys which are mindless, which you can get to very, very quickly just without looking down and without having to say move tool. Now I have to go all the way to this side of the keyboard, and because my hand's on the mouse, I have to look down and take my eyes off of what I'm doing. And having the move tool allows me to very quickly, I can grab that and I'm hitting move and I'm just moving instantly. And then with the rotate being E, I can grab that very quickly and rotate things as I need. It's a standard rotate tool, and scaling as well is there at R. And tape measure tool is the default for T. So with some of the other shortcuts, they're kind of the logic behind them. If you look at scale, let's say, so the R is scale. And normally that was rectangle, so I shift that over, or I move that over to ShiftR, which is a very easy one to get to because my pinky just slides down to Shift, finger just goes up to R, and I can do that very seamlessly. But when we get into, say, Control R, it becomes the rotated rectangle. So the logic there is they repeat, but Alt R is Frito Scale. So R is Scale, Alt R is Frito Scale. And what that does is that'll allow me to scale a little bit differently, and it's a different version of the scale tool, and some situations that is more relevant to use than the native scale tool. When I get into Control Shift R, that's the box stretching, which to me is another type of scaling. So there's 3 types of scale tools that I have associated, with the R tool. And same with Move. So I have the native Move tool at W, and I have the plug-in Move tool at Shift W. So I'm able to call that and have those 2 different versions of the Move tool centered around the W key. The one that I use all the time, and then the one that I'll use, which is scenario specific. If I need something that this would be better suited to do, then I'll switch it to that, and can very easily get to that. The things like the eraser tool here on Shift E, that again was because the E was taken by Rotate tool. But when we get down to Alt E, I'm using the E to make me remember erase. And then this is the plug-in erase straight curves. So I have 2 things that do erasing there on the E key. And I try to follow that logic throughout these keyboard shortcuts. So they're either going to be associated with something else that helps me remember, something else that they do, or I'm trying to, especially in the letters, as we get down here, below the F and number keys, they'll usually have the letter will be what the tool starts with, or it'll be some way that helps me remember what I'm doing. Like I said, the Alt R is scaling or Frito Scale. It doesn't have anything to do with the letter R other than the fact that I have scale on the R up here. So I wanted to continue and tie all my scale tools into the same letter in any one of these combinations. But things like Alt W here or Control W here, Control W is weld, Alt W is work plane. So for me, those are about the W representing what the tool is doing. If that makes sense. So you can see the rest of these here. Things like Shift Q I have, and that's select quad face loops, and I use that one all the time. And I can do that just very quickly. Show that here. That was one we talked about last week when we made our pillar caps and some of the other caps. But what that one does is it allows me to, in a 5-sided situation or a 4-sided situation like this, that's not a surface because this isn't smooth, and we have a hard edge here between these 2 faces. Even if this was smooth, as long as this wasn't set above 90 degrees here, it's set above 90 degrees, and I go to select. Now I'm selecting a surface, and I'm selecting everything. But if it's set below, turn back on hidden geometry or triple click and drop that back down below 90 degrees, then those edges will harden again. But the only way in past was for me to select all the way around, manually turn this, hold Shift, select here, or hold Controls or Shift and select those other edges or those faces, and keep having to rotate. And that takes a while to get around, as opposed to being able to get inside, grab one edge, go Shift Q, and now I've selected all of those all the way around with just one operation. And when you get into manipulating, it's just a lot faster to do that, and then use my keyboard shortcut for joint push pull and select everything, joint push pull, and then I can pull all 4 of those faces out at the same time. So it's very quickly. I didn't have to move the camera at all. That's Shift Q, and then my shortcut for joint push-pull. I'm able to, without moving the camera, pull all 4 sides of these at the same time. Take that back. The Shift Q option is in the Select Toys that we should have downloaded in one of the previous videos. They're the selection toys here. And this gives you a right-click context menu, which will give you these options here. Select, select only, or deselect only. So the select option gives you all of these. And this is the one we want right here, quad-faced loops. And that'll look for loops all the way around, which are quad-faced. And it would work as well on things like this, where I can get in. As long as I'm inside the group, I can grab that edge, use my shortcut, and that's selected all of those all the way around. And that'd be really tricky to do. It'd be really hard to go around. There's no easy way to select all of those outer surfaces. You would have to probably adjust the smoothing, and then maybe you could grab these and manipulate them that way. But this will select the edge and the face in between all the way around. And if I didn't want it to select all the way around, then all I would have to do is say delete, delete, and now grab an edge and run quad face selection, and it'll stop right there because it ran out of quad faces to select. That makes sense. Same would be true here. If this was unsoftened, then I wanted to select this outer face, I could just click an edge, quad face selection, and do that. So very quickly with the keyboard shortcuts. Jump back over here and talked about these. The text tool obviously is for when you get into callouts. Draw along and move along are tools that are here in the Frito Tools toolbar. If you turn them on, you can go to your little golden wrench here and you would go down and turn them on again in here. So you just want to make sure that they're turned on. Move along is there, and then draw along was up here. And they'll show up then in your toolbar when you restart. So move along is, you'd have to look at the documentation for it, but it is a version of the move tool, which gives you some different options here and allows you to restrict by different, either move along a plane or move along a vector, which we talked about vector a little bit last time, and then allow you some other options here. So there is some documentation with this tool that, I don't know if there's a quick link to it up here. Perhaps not, but there's some videos on Frito's web, or on his YouTube channel, that go through it in detail as well. And then the draw along has a little bit more options as far as snapping, the things that it's recognizing. And this came out before Sketchup 2016, which will now by default find the center on arcs and things, but it was nice with the draw along that Frito came out with that it would find that for you as well. So just the edge properties of what you're drawing, how you're restricting that edge as you're drawing it, and what it's finishing as. So it applies this whole Frito top toolbar and gives you different options. And again, it's set in a way that I can grab Shift W to grab the move along, and then I have the other options set here for draw along as Control Q. For some reason it's not working. But Now I can call that and then call the regular draw tool right away, or grab the Frito draw tool, all in a very similar hand movement as I'm going through. I also noticed when I was doing that, there are, in the Frito Tools, it looked like there was a link to get to the videos here. So you can go to Tools to learn how to use those. Go to Tools, Frito Tools. Once you've installed that, go down to Video, and then go over to, let's say, Move Along, and that should open up the web browser here and give you the link to the plugin. And you can go right from Sketchup and link over and see how to use this. And it'll give you the rundown on all of the tools within the Frito toolbar. Another interesting one we're going to talk a lot about as we get going is this Throw To plugin, but I have that set to Alt-Shift-T or Alt-T. And I have two different versions of that, Throw To Infinity and Throw To Plane. So talk about that, but that is a really neat tool. It allows you to call that, and whatever I have selected, I can move the closest end to the closest end. Let's say the face here, that's the direction we're moving, will stick to the face I select. So I grabbed and moved it to there, and then it just moved it back, and I can move it over. Let's see, I could move it up, and it will snap, and I can move it to the back, and I can move it back down. So it's just finding the closest face in the direction that it's moving and stopping it at the plane of the selected face that you use. So you select first, you call the tool, and then you can very quickly and easily toss it around depending on where you're going, what you want to do with it. So that's the Throw To Plane option, and then there's a Throw To Infinity, which will just keep going until it hits something, and you pick a direction that you want to throw it. But we're going to use that one quite a bit as we get into modeling, and I use that all the time as well. So let me see, random select, I use that for some of the texturing that we're going to do. I have some zoom things set here with the W and the E, and again, Frito Scale for Control-Shift-R for box stretching, which is pretty interesting. So Control-Shift-R, we'll pull that up. And that's part of the Frito Scale tool set, which we're going to talk about. But again, just to show you, with the thinking of the keyboard shortcuts, here's R, and that's my scale. You can look at what it's doing to those bullnose, stretching them out. Here's here's Alt-R, which is doing the same thing, and that's calling the Frito Scale scaling tool. It's a little bit different in how it works. And there's certain situations where just draw a rotated rectangle, let's say. Let me just draw a regular rotated rectangle and then rotate it. Now, say I wanted to scale this, and I call the native scale tool. But I wanted to scale this in the direction that this is rotated. Well, I can't easily do that. I could get in and grab this edge, try to scale that down. There's nothing for it to snap to because it's not on it's not aligned to the axis of origin. But I could easily grab that and then grab the Frito Scale option, and now I can scale and manipulate this in the direction here, and I could also set a direction that I wanted that to go. And it will align itself to things like that. So depending on what you're using, also if I wanted to scale just this edge and I try to use the native scale tool, that would happen if I use the Frito Scale tool. Now I can scale, hold control, and move that edge in both directions. So it's good to have both, because it's situational. The other thing with the Frito scales, if I have just an edge by itself with no face and I call the scale tool, nothing happens. I can't scale just an edge. But with Frito Scale, I can scale just an edge by itself. When it comes to the box scaling, that Control-Shift-R, I select that and go to Control-Shift-R. Now, there's actually a plane in between, and watch what happens. As I scale this, it doesn't stretch out those bullnose. It's scaling at the base level component and then splitting those in half, which would allow me to now add extra in there without messing up the scale that we created when we created these, because they were built to scale. So if we would stretch them, now I don't have a 6 by 12 bullnose anymore. Now I have something that may not be representative, and if I just grab that and scale that, it's not going to work. So in those situations, I'll just quickly and easily, with a derivative of the same key my scale key is set for, is grab the box scaling option and do that. So that's the thinking behind that. And get down to the A, S, and D. And I have the arc tool, which is native. I have push-pull and joint push-pull on S and D. And I just did that because the scale I had moved, so I didn't need the S anymore. And S is something that, I don't want to come all the way over here for P. And that's the idea. So I want the S here. It doesn't have anything to do with push-pull. It's just there, kind of similar thinking between the W, E, and R being up here, the move, rotate, and scale. S is something that I'm on all the time because I'm always returning back to this left-hand typing position. So I'm on the S, and I can just very quickly, I'm grabbing that push-pull tool, selecting, got my push-pull, and I'm just tapping S, and I can very quickly, without having to come all the way over here, it's hard for me to get to this side without taking my hand, natively, because we memorize these via typing. I would have to look down, and that's what I don't want to do when I'm in the middle of these operations. So joint push-pull is set to D, and it's there simply because it's next to push-pull. And so that I have them side by side, it helps my memory when it comes to, okay, I want to manipulate, I want to extrude, my push-pull. It's not even about the keys, it's about the fingers. So I know that this is my ring finger for push-pull and my middle finger for joint push-pull at my standard position. And it doesn't have anything to do with the S or the D. They don't have any relation. I don't remember it. I just remember these fingers more so than the keys that are under them. And that's true of all of these keyboard shortcuts. It's the finger positions which I focus on. And as you remember them and you're into some heavy, fast, hardcore modeling, you're not thinking about what you're hitting, thinking about that finger position from memory, and you're just going to it very quickly. So I also have a little bit of, similar to what I did up here, is the Alt-S is the normal push-pull. And I'll just slide my thumb off the space bar over to Alt. Now instead of hitting push-pull, I can hit Alt-push-pull essentially, or Alt-S. And now I'm calling the normal push-pull. There's regular, here's the normal, which is regular push-pull in all of its functionality minus the options that you get up top. But for all intents and purposes, what this does and how it manipulates this face is it's restricted by the similar logic that the normal push-pull is. It'll use the face normal and follow that direction, and that's all it will do. It can only do one face at a time, so it's not a joint push-pull. It's not a vector push-pull. It aligns itself closely to the native push-pull. So that's how, and then maybe that N might even stand for native and not normal push-pull. It might be the native push-pull. But it just allows you to work within groups, and that's the big thing with it. So instead, if I wanted to manipulate this, instead of getting in this group and going all the way down to the base level to the push-pull, now I can be on the outside of all of the groups at the very top, and now I can call normal push-pull, and I can move that face that's 4 or 5 levels down within these nested groups. And very quickly I can go through and manipulate any face here regardless of its grouping in a similar way that the normal push-pull would do, and I'm using a similar keyboard shortcut. I also have the vector push-pull, which is Alt-Shift-D, and D is the joint push-pull, and then that combination is the vector push-pull. So I don't use the vector push-pull a lot in speed modeling. I use it when it comes to certain things. A lot of times with building a roof, a lot of times with just wanting to manipulate things straight up and down, and it's all, there's some projects where I'll use it multiple times, some projects I never use it. It's all situation based. It's understanding the logic, finding yourself in a modeling situation where you need to create something, and then remembering which tool does that very thing. But knowing the rules which those tools are governed by is what allows you to think about it and say, okay, this is a job for this specific tool. And then tying everything to the keyboard shortcuts and knowing how to get to it very quickly as your brain's working is what it's, speed modeling and speeding up this workflow, it's what it's all about. Let's jump back over here. This is a big one here. Before I jump ahead, we have offset on the F, which is standard, and then make component on the G, which is standard. So I haven't changed those. Those come with SketchUp. ShiftA is one that I use all the time, and that is to Control A is select everything. That's a normal shortcut in every software. ShiftA, again, it's ShiftA because it's derivative of Control A. I'm going to just do ShiftA is a select all, but it selects all instances. So it's just another variation of select all. So if I grab an instance here, and it shows me I have 35 in the model, and I hit ShiftA, now I have 35 selected because I've selected every instance there. Do the same with these pillars. That's a component. There's 4 in the model. ShiftA, I select all 4. Same with these rafters up top. With ShiftA, I've selected all of them. And instead of trying to go and move the camera, now move the camera back, move the camera, drag select, and then move the camera back, and then manipulate. Instead, I can grab one, stay in the same camera position, ShiftA, now I can scale. Or in something like this, and what I didn't do in the last video when we built this, because we didn't talk about the box scaling at that point, which is normally how I would do it, instead of stretching out this profile that we created, we actually scaled these in. And if we scale that, you can see that profile gets narrow. And it was actually a lot longer of a profile. I think we were somewhere out here. But in that scenario, I'd get in, grab one, Shift-A, and then I would use my box scaling, or not box scaling, box stretching, which doesn't change the outside. It just, remember, kind of creates a plane and splits this in the middle and then stretches it from the middle in or out. So now as I move this, I can go all the way in, or I can tap Control. Actually turned it inside out, but even at its smallest point, I haven't affected that profile. So again, I can grab that without looking, hold Control, and move those at the same time. I already moved one half without moving the other. There we go. So Shift-A, use my box scaling, and now I can scale this in or out, holding Control as scaling from the center, or tapping Control and letting your hand off with the Frito scale, and you can move from center. And if you hit Control again, it just now starts to move one side. So tap Control and I'm back to moving from center. But with thinking that I'm doing this on the fly and I'm just hitting Control with my pinky and I'm not looking down and I'm not thinking about it. So, but just wanted to point out how that's a derivative of the scale tool, and those are different scenarios in which I need to scale things where the native one doesn't work, and that's why I assigned them there. So as I was going and started to do this more and more with the keyboard shortcuts, I would scale something and say, oh, this is a job for this variation of the scale tool, and then I would go and probably for a number of weeks or months I would go and find the icon and I would use that. And then I thought to myself, hey, I'm using this all the time. It would be a lot faster if I created a keyboard shortcut and then think about where do I put that keyboard shortcut. And then I just say, oh, let me put it where I'll remember because it's associated with that native tool. So we did the instances select all and talked about the different scaling variations by using that to very quickly grab things. It's good for texturing as well. The step extrude is set to Shift S because it's kind of a push-pull operation. It does a push-pull, but it does it in steps and works very good for steps, actually. Situations like this, I can call this, it's a plugin, and it's in here under Step Extrude, and you see that it shows me an indicator, Shift S. Now, normally to make these steps, one way to do it would be to go in, and you either have to do the math, and imagine you have 10 of these things, you have to do the math, figure out where your top step would end up, and then get to your bottom, or go to your top step, because steps are tricky. When you want to bring this up 6 inches, and now you would want to bring this up, you can't just pull this, it seems to get stuck here, but you could go 12, enter, and it snaps to the top. So let me pull that up again, go 12, enter, and it only went 6. So steps are tricky like that as you're coming up, and it's a lot better sometimes to go to the back step where I would go 30 and then pull this up and go 24, pull this up and go 18, pull this up and go 12, pull this up and go 6, do it that way. Or I would go in here and I would go 6, and then I would double click, 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 double click. And that takes a while. The other way to do it would be do your first one, 6, enter, grab this one, snap it to here, now go 6, enter, grab this one, snap it to here, now go 6, enter, grab this one, snap it to here, now go 6, enter. So I'm clicking and dragging, holding it down, snapping it to the top, and then letting go of the left mouse. And now just clicking once and pulling it up and typing 6, enter. So that took a while. Now, Step Extrude. Here's why this is an awesome plugin. Use my keyboard shortcut, Shift S, and type 6, enter. Done. So it's a version of push-pull, and it does it by increments. It remembers the previous one that you entered, and it exponentially multiplies that as you go. So it did 6, 12, 18, 24, 30. And it's giving me an indicator too. So I'm going to go Shift S, type 6, enter, and now it says our units are here off. Just double check here so I can show you. I'm going to go to model info, not preferences. Model info, again, is relative to this session only. Preferences will set every time you open SketchUp. The preferences are kind of the default. The model info are things that you can change session to session without affecting the default parameters. So let's go units. Never had this problem before. My units are set properly to architectural, but for whatever reason, that tool is defaulting to meters. So maybe it had an issue here and it needs to be updated for 2016. I'm not sure, but that always worked properly in the previous versions. But it would give you an indicator and tell you the final height at this point as you click through. So even if I undo this is kind of important with this tool, and it's a little bit weird, and I think maybe it should be updated and changed. If I undo this, it doesn't go back to 0. I'm still at level 2. So I click this one again, and now it's up to level 3. I undo it, click it again, now it's up to level 4. And you see what's happening there. So be mindful if you undo, and you want to start over, you got to run the tool again. So instead of going up to my extensions and going down to find it and look through my list, oh, here it is. I can just call it with my shortcut. So I'm at level 11, I call it, I have to type 6 enter again, but now I'm back to level 0, and I can do this. So it's up to you if you want to use that plugin. I don't think you could see what I just did and not go and get that plugin and see how powerful and quick that is and the time that I just saved in doing that. And here's another scenario. When you get into, and you landscape architects will really appreciate this, those that draw contour lines on your projects. When you get into contour lines, and this is just a quick example, I'm going to grab this and I'm going to weld this here. And I'm going to move this over. I'm going to do an array, let's say 5x. Now let's say these are contour lines, and they're all welded together. And you do that, you can use that simplify curves option. So even if you imported these from AutoCAD and now they're just all edges here, and these are your contour lines, and it's important that they're all welded together. So I can use my path select, double click, and select one and weld it. Or what I would do would probably be to move this over, select all of them, deselect these. Now all of these, I just have edges. Then I can go to that simplify curves, set this to 0. I don't want to simplify them because they're already kind of segmented. And it didn't do anything as far as simplifying, but it welded multiple curves at the same time. So it's just a little trick that you can use that simplify tool for. Now that they're welded, I can actually use step extrude with these, believe it or not. Even though it's not a face, this is something I discovered by accident and I was blown away, but I can extrude these edges, or I can step these edges. When we get into contours, you usually have, let's say these are 5-foot separations of contour, and I would use my step extrude. I would type 60 enter, and now let's say the first one's set where I need it. I can click here, click here, click here, click here, and click here, and I've just stepped these contours up to where they need to be without manually having to move them with my move tool. Now, if that didn't blow your mind, I don't know what will. And I'm sure you can really start to see the power of this tool. The other power with a group-based workflow, again, is that this will do our groups to faces by any edge. Now we have all of these as separate groups. That one did not. I'm going to copy that, paste that, explode that, and delete that. So these are all separated. So it will work from outside the group at the very top level. So we're at the very top. There's no groups selected. I can use the step extrude, set that to 6 inches, and I can actually click, and it'll go through inside of those nested groups, and that would work. So again, group-based workflow. It's one of those tools that's very helpful in those situations. Jump back here. So we did step extrude, dimension tool. I think might natively be D, and since I took D for joint push pull, I just switched it to Shift D. Reverse faces, Shift S or Shift F. I do that all the time. Very quickly, I can grab, as I'm modeling, Shift F is probably the easiest thing to find as a variation key. Pinky to shift and your finger's already on F. So you can very quickly switch faces, select them, flip them, and go through. Moving right along, we did reverse faces, make group. Shift G is not a native one, but it just makes sense. Group is component. Shift G or G is make component, so Shift G is make group. It's probably the easiest, one of the easiest ones to remember. Control A, save, delete, or Control A and save are standard. Delete I've set up to Control D because I don't want to come all the way over here to the delete key. So that's very quick. I can grab stuff, just delete it, undo that, delete that face, get back. Make group delete is a very powerful one, just because it's a double combination of keyboard shortcuts. But if I would, let's explode this, and now I wanted to delete this outer part, double click and delete it, I've deleted everything. Or I'd have to delete, or I'd have to select the outer edge, hold Control, select the inner edge or face, and then let me grab this, and then delete that. Or I'd have to double click and then deselect this and then delete that. For me, I just double click, make group, delete. And I do that so often that it's probably the fastest way when it comes to grab all of those, explode them. But if I just wanted to delete that face, and then a lot of times this is what I see people do, delete that face, grab the eraser tool, and then go delete the edges. Or in a situation like this, now you select the face, you hold Control or Shift, and then you have to make 3 clicks to select what you want, or you double click and you make 1 click, and oh, I can't deselect this inner edge because it's exploded. So I'd have to go through and try to manually do this. You can't use the path select for deselecting. So the quickest way is to make that a group. And again, making a group creates a second set of edges that supports both attaching faces. So it'll recreate the edge that's here and leave it so it supports this. Instead of deleting this, which got rid of the edge which supported that face, now group it, delete it. Now everything else stays intact. And that's something you need, not even an option. Get that down. Remember that. Group, delete. You'll need that. It helps so much when it comes to cleaning things up and prepping your 2D stuff. And then when you get into modeling, it's something that you need to commit to memory, and it needs to be second nature. So I'd recommend that Control D for your delete, and Shift G, Control D is what I'm doing in that situation. So if I would talk through it, I would get in, double click, Shift G, Control D, double click, Shift G, Control D, double click, Shift G, Control D. So Control G I have set for group copies convert into components, which we talked about a little bit in the previous video, but that simply, if this was a component, or this was a group, not a component, it says group up here, and I had multiple copies and I forgot to turn this to a component before I made my copies. And this really helps with a group-based workflow because you don't have to think about it as much. So let's say these boxes here, I move them around, and the nice thing, even though groups aren't committed to instancing like components, it's why there's a difference between the two. It's why they're so similar except for that one difference. If this were a component and I would manipulate it, then all 4 would be manipulated. But groups will also retain the fact that there's other copies of groups. So they don't help each other in the model, but this one little piece of information allows you then, with what TomTom did with this plugin, you could right click, and now if there are group copies in here, this will show up. If they're not group copies, I was wrong. It will still show up as long as there's a group because there's one in the model. But if there's more than one up here, that contextual menu will show up. And you can say select active, select all, and you want to select all, or selecting all would allow you to select all four. It's similar to our ShiftA where we were able to select all components. And I should probably find a shortcut derivative for select all group copies, but I don't really need to because what I'll do is just convert them into components. And now when I select on that, I have 4 components in the model and I can hit Shift-A. And now those group copies, if I go back out, I'll show you something that's important here. See how this says 4 in the model up here in Entity Info? Watch what happens if I open this group and close this group. So now I'm in the group, I close it, I've reverted to 1 in the model just by opening this. Now I click here, there's going to be 3. It took it out of the equation for how many there were in the model. I don't understand necessarily the logic behind that, but I just know if you double click on this and open it, now there will only be 2, and this will be only 1. So, but let me undo that, because I guess I've got into edit mode, and it's assuming that I'm going to edit this. So now it's going to be different than the other ones that are in the model. So if I make it, back it all the way out, undo it and get back in. Nope, gotta undo that. Now I'm back to 4 in the model. I can use my shortcut for convert this into a component. Just Control G, and now I have 4 in the model. Now I can manipulate them all together. So if I was not very careful and I was moving those around and I just made them into groups, I forgot to make them into components, I moved them into place, I go back and I grab one, and before I open it, I look up and I realize it's a group copy, not a component copy, but I want to manipulate them all in unison, then it's that now I don't have group copies anymore. I have instances here in the selection toys. And that select all is what we're shortcutting. But if it was a group copy, it would say group copy, and then it has one extra thing at the bottom that says convert into components. So it made all those copies into components, which are instances. So it's all kind of part of selecting and manipulating quickly with those. So that's Control G. Moving down here, I have a couple empty slots here, and these are ones that I'll continue to use and refer back to this list when I have a new one that I want to set up with a shortcut. So we have normal push-pull we talked about, divide face. We showed that a little bit, but that again allows me to very quickly get in, and it cuts out a step when it comes to using the tape measure tool, pulling something out, and then drawing a line. It's a very similar tool to the tape measure tool. Now I could just hit Alt-D and grab that edge. I have to be inside the group. Grab that edge and pull it out. And now I can type a measurement. I could do group arrays with this as well, like we showed in the previous video. So that's pretty powerful and good to have on hand. Alt-D is a very quick one, and it's set to Alt-D because it's for divide. Fillet, 2D corners, that's a part of a professional paid plugin. We'll talk about that. Split sausage we talked about. Set that there. And S for split. Vector we talked about. Select only front default material. F is for front. And I use that when I'm doing, let's say 3 or 4 variations of a particular material that I want to distribute over all of the soldier course, or we'll talk about that when we get into texturing, but that's there for a reason. Generate faces is that one we've talked about a lot, and I'm able to just use that very quickly, go through, select that edge, generate faces, and that quickly I've created a face there. So instead of either drawing the line and trying to snap, doing it that way, or even right-clicking, going down and looking, which all takes time, now I could just click it and boom, drop it in that quickly. Split solid to plane, that's for another lesson. Mirror selection we talked about, and that's a good one to have handy. I have this set to F because for some reason, I guess it reminds me of mirror and flipping things around and flipping them to the other side. So F is kind of set there for that. Dynaescape set to Control-D for clean all. This Fix-It plugin, which is set to Control-Alt-F, I use all of the time. And it's kind of part of this whole group-based, solid modeling-based workflow. So if I wanted to get in and clean something up, and I wanted this to be a solid, you see now it's just saying group. There's a couple ways. There's a solid solver, there's a solid inspector. The first thing I do is run this Fix-It 101. It works in a variety of situations. It will go through, and if I turn on X-ray mode, let's see, there's no inner edges there right now. But I'm going to get inside of here, and I'm just going to do my Control-Alt-G. Now I've made a face there. Select this edge, do that Generate Faces shortcut. Selected and generated another one. So we go through, now we have some interior faces in there. Or at least one. Let's do the form because they weren't there. But if I delete these, see we have some interior faces, we have these edges on the outside, so the cleanup work on that to get that to be a solid would be a little bit tedious. With this Fix-It, and it's in the right click option, but I have this set to Control-Alt-F. I could just do that very quickly. Again, Control-Alt and click something, Control-Alt-F. It goes through, it removed 3 internal faces, merged 5 faces, removed 5 edges, went through and tried to fix this. Didn't have enough there. So what I can do is double click on this, Control-A, Control-Shift-G. Now I generated all the faces. Control-A again, now run Fix-It, and it went through because I had all the faces there. Now I get out and I've just created a solid group that quickly utilizing those shortcuts. It'll clean up 2D data. Go back, run that again. So it removed 48 edges. So I guess there was some double edges left over in here, and there was 2 sets, one for each side. And it went through and deleted those. Let's see, I can run it here. Deleted some stuff there. We could run it here. Got rid of these internal edges. All depends, kind of knowing what the tool will do and allowing you to clean up things. Something like this that we built very clean shouldn't have anything. It should be all zeros. It's already solid. It should be all zeros. It's already solid. But it's also would work if I was inside this group and I had some extra geometry kind of floating around, an extra edge, I don't know, some stuff that wasn't a part of this. And I could select everything and run that, and it will delete those little stray edges that were there and help try to get this down as clean as it can. So I use that a lot. If I ran it on here, it would get rid of all of these top and bottom edges because these are coplanar surfaces. They don't need these edges necessarily to support a face here, and SketchUp thinks, oh, that's extra, we can clean that up. So this plugin will run and clean that up on the top and the bottom, and then just leave the edges which it needs. So it's kind of similar to the cleanup plugin from TomTom, but it just works very quickly on the fly. We'll go down into your nested groups and clean things up. So That's one I've used so much that I've committed it to a keyboard shortcut. Find edge gaps, Control Alt G. We talked about that a lot. And I don't have any here. I don't have anything open, so but that was the one that we were using to do some cleanup work. And moving along to the next row, Z for camera previous. We talked about this a little bit, but this is really important. Now I can just hit Z one time. It's an easy one to get to and get back to where I was and cycle through. Just tapping Z. It's very convenient if you get stuck and you're zooming and now you're, what's going on? I'm in the wall. I don't know what's going on. Z. You just keep tapping it until you get back out of wherever you are. Or sometimes you're trying to do something and you're very tight in something and things keep going haywire like this. You're getting into these clipping planes. You're trying to, and then you zoom out, and now you're zooming, and nothing's going on, and you just want to throw the keyboard out the window, which happens a lot early on when you're using SketchUp, and you're very frustrated. Now I set that keyboard shortcut to previous camera position. I could just hit Z 2 times, and now I'm out, and I'm back to looking at this whole thing. So that's a good one. Set that up, definitely. X I have set to explode just because. Explode, obviously, I don't think it's a native shortcut, but I set that up and then I can tap that very quickly. C is native for circle, V is native for follow me, and B is native for paint bucket. So I left all those alone because they're the native tools on my left hand. That's why I left them alone. So and then I have variations of those. Shift Z for zoom to selection, which is another way to kind of really move around quickly. And then I have another variation. I have zoom extents set in here as well, somewhere. Or maybe that one is the zoom extents that I have. All right, so there's the zoom, and that's Control or Shift Alt Z. Z is previous, Control Z is undo. So normally I had that to zoom all, and sometimes as you update versions, you have to go back and tweak some of your keyboard shortcuts as they're not working. I haven't used 2016 enough yet in production to really go and tweak everything and make sure that they are set up exactly like my 2015 was. But moving along, we have closed grouper component. We talk about that a lot with Shift C, Shift V for paste in place. We talk about that a lot. Undo, copy, cut, paste, those are all standard. Select only border edges is part of this selection toy. So if you would right click and go to select only border edges, it would deselect everything except the perimeter. Do that. Even in here, get in and I'm selected everything. I could right click, go to select only border edges, and actually didn't select anything. But if I grab that, now I don't have any borders selected. It's because they're all welded together. So that's not a good example. But obviously something that was very busy, even a terrain that had hundreds and hundreds of faces and you just wanted to select the outside, I have that set up to Control B. So I can very quickly just select the border edges, and from there I could even use our edge extrusion tools and things that we talked about with extruding by vector. We could grab those and manipulate those edges because we very quickly got to the border edges that we wanted. Cycle previous selections is part of the selection memory plugin by TomTom. And I have that set here to Alt Z. So I'm hitting that, and you see that it's changing my selection to the previous. And that's a really good one. It's a great plugin. It helps when you accidentally deselect something that you spent a lot of time selecting, then you can go back to that without having to reselect it. Intersect faces I use all the time. That's Alt-X. I'm kind of thinking cut. It's another way that I'm slicing, intersecting, Xing. So that's how my mind works with that one. Cleanup plugin from TomTom. We'll talk about that in another video. View hidden geometry. Turning that on. I have that set to Alt-V for view. I also used to use the H key, but that was now on the other side of the keyboard. So Alt-B for through paint. Again, B for regular paint. Alt-B is the alternative paint. Kind of how I think about that. And it's right here on the keyboard. Then different zoom variation. Remove lonely vertices. Alt-Shift-V. So talked about that. You can see we have a situation like we have something connecting to this, and that's a group. And now we get in here and we can kind of see we've created two extra. If I mark vertices, created two extra ones. And if I pull this now, I have these extra lines here. So very quickly, now I can go through there and select all of those and go Alt-Shift-V, and it will remove the extra ones without me having to go up here and look at the toolbar. So I can do that while I'm in cleanup mode on the fly and very quickly and easily. The other one that I have is Alt-G, and I don't know if I talked about that, but that was to delete these guides very quickly. So if I'm marking vertices or I'm pulling out construction lines and then I have these all over the place and I just want to clean them up very quickly, I just Alt-G and I get rid of those. So extrude edges by vector, Control-Shift-V to object, and then extrude edges, or Control-Alt-V, which is here, and then Control-Shift-V, which I use this one more, and it's easier for me to get to Control-Alt-V, which is why I have this set here. Control-Shift-V is a little bit kind of weird with dexterity, but I'll remember where that is when I need to extrude something and then have it cut into an object. So last but not least, let's talk about selecting, and spacebar is the default select tool. Always kind of have your thumb on spacebar. Always after every operation, you want to get out of that tool, go to the select tool. It's not just a select tool. I feel like it is what you should be moving around. It's kind of the get out of your tool. So if you're in a move tool or something and you want to let it go in mid-operation, you want to, I moved this. Instead of, darn it, click and then undo, if you grab it and you're moving, and again, I just tapped it, my finger's not on the mouse button anymore, I can just hit the space bar and it kind of gets out of that tool and then drops whatever operation that it was in the middle of. So the space bar is something you want to get really comfortable with, and you say, I messed up, I don't want to grab that. You just hit the space bar and it kind of drops the tool and puts back whatever you were working on. So obviously for selecting and things, you're going to grab that all the time. You're going to be hitting the space bar. And get out of that. And there's the three other variations of the selection process I have set for plugins that I use. Shift Space is the selection brush from Artisan, and that's a commercial plugin, but Shift Space gives me, if I'm inside here, let's see, there it is. This allows me to kind of paint a selection that I want. So it's something where I have a lot of faces. Just use this for an example. Deselect a shift spacebar. Now I can kind of draw select here and make the size of this bigger and smaller, holding the arrow key down, which I don't like because it's on that side, but it makes sense. And then I have control space for the path select tool. I always use that. Kind of get to that very quickly. Double click on things, deselect what I don't want. Just another way to get at these selections over curves. And the way that selections work, if you think about it and you understand how the anatomy of geometry works, that video that I did a few years ago on that, you understand there are no curves in SketchUp. They're called curves, they're called arcs, but they are just straight lines that are being curved based on some mathematical thing. But there doesn't make these lines, this curve is a series of straight lines. It's not a true curve. It's not like a vector drawing program where you can make true curves. Everything is straight. And when you get into selecting, it's why sometimes pull this out and explode this curve. If I want to, now these are all a series of edges, and these curves and curved surfaces, especially in what we do in the landscape industry, they become pretty routine part of the business, and selecting them is very important. So finding a way to do that with the path select tool by double clicking. It also allows you to get down. You can weld this now very quickly. Use our simplify set to 0. Now I can just select that in one click if it's welded. So these selection options are understanding how these edges work, and why in some cases you can select all of them in one click. Sometimes they're broken. Probably the inside here, maybe. Luckily these are all okay. The other one that I have set up here is the last one, Control-Shift-Space, which is just Control-Shift-Space. So I can just kind of slide 2 fingers over. But that's the hover select. And the hover select comes with the Frito Tools. And actually, I'm wrong. It doesn't come with the Frito Tools. And I have that listed here, that it's part of Frito Tools. And that's wrong. I have to update that. I think I'm wrong. Let me just go through it. No, it's not here. You have to install that separately, and I think it puts itself in the Frito Tools toolbar once you install it. Let me just look really quick here, and because it's worth noting, it's a decent tool in certain scenarios. It's just type in hover select, install. Loaded. Now my keyboard shortcut should work. It's not. It's there. Now it showed it actually added that as a menu item. And maybe I have to redo my keyboard shortcuts. So I go down to preferences, let's go to shortcuts, type hover. Put it in there. So. Okay, so I'll have to restart, I think, to get to that being loaded into the preferences and stuff. But once I do that, it should recognize my keyboard shortcut. And it's just a different way to kind of hover over edges and select them. And you can set these edge properties to extend to curve, things like that, instead of going through and clicking all of these. Or with path select, you're kind of going around this way. With hover select, when I had the keyboard shortcut, now I can just kind of get in there and click and drag. There's a couple different ways that this will work. If I select the face, it'll select the outer and inner edges, and it'll give you some visual indicators showing me a minus sign. Now I'm deselecting. Let me show you here. In that group. Control T to deselect. Hover select. Now I'm clicking and dragging, and you see that it's going through. And hover select's not the best here for grabbing these edges. I can set this to Control T, select this to edge mode, and grab it, and it seems to work a little better. But if I just wanted to, let's say, grab these faces in here, hover select is a really good option to do that. So I can click, and now I'm selected. Control T. Okay, it's at the plus sign. Now I can just drag and come around. And I was able to select all those edges. So it's just another tool in the arsenal. Has a little bit different functionality than the other ones, but that's the basic rundown of those keyboard shortcuts. And I know it's a lot to take in, and it's a little long-winded in the explanation, and there's some things that we haven't really used so far, but I thought just the logic of why they're set up the way they are and kind of demonstrating some of the functionality would go a long way in understanding and taking out the complexity of it a little bit and just kind of reducing down the logic. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through and I am going to build what we've already built here. Drop all these down. I'm going to reduce everything to its plan view state. So I kind of took what we did here, and I'm going to rebuild this stuff. And I'm going to do it at full speed, and I'm not going to talk as much. But I'm just going to have the camera set on my keyboard shortcut hand, and I'm going to rebuild everything we built here and show you how fast that I can do it in full speed. Okay, so let's go through here, and I'm going to build these elements very quickly. And I'm not going to spend time on different ways to do it. I'm just going to plow through pretty much brute force the way that I would do it in production. And just give an idea of how I use my keyboard shortcuts and things like that, and just follow along, kind of pay attention to my hands there in the little window, and maybe follow some of the logic and things that I use. But I'm going to try not to narrate quite as much, and just go through and plow through this. So first I think I'll tackle these steps here, and I'm going to use kind of for reference here, I can go through, but I'm going to actually use step extrude here. And I'm going to clean this up with fix it. And I'm going to drop these down here actually by 3 inches. And now I'm going to use normal, set to group, and pull this up 3 inches. Convert that to a component, pull that out, and do the first way we did this, just to make kind of a straight run, full nose, zip that off. We have that version, and I can go through here. I'm going to get inside of this one, grab this, move this edge over 6 inches. And convert that to a construction line. And another way, I could have just pulled a construction line there. Grab that. It's a component. Let's go across. Do 7x. Get inside here. Make everything like narrow, offset this face, pull this center out here. Oops. Make sure it's snapped. And we have our joint there. And fix this one. Pull that across so they stay components. Actually delete these, grab all those with ShiftA, make those a group, grab it from the back, pull those up, 4x center. And there, the steps are done. Let's just do the fire pit. Get in here, pull this up. 16, set the group, I'm gonna grab the top, pull that up 3. Turn that geometry off, get inside, and I want to make sure group is off. Pull that by 2. And so we can throw the edges on there if we wanted. And unsoften. Throw a full nose on here if we wanted. Cut back and inside, paste that, path select. Actually, I need to make that a face first, path select. Run that around really quick. And get inside there again. Path select, and soften, smooth that. Here, make that a group, and let's go throw to, pull that up, bring it back down just a hair, and let's do these steps here. I'm going to do normal push-pull, and so let's do step extrude. Throw to, and should be separate here. Drop that down. So let's drop it down by 2. Let's do a 2-inch cap here. So I'm just gonna select maybe this outer edge this time. Offset that. This way. Select that and put it in its own group. Let's go. Just pull that up. 2 inches. Yes. Yes. And make sure thickening is on. And come in 14. Minus 14. Grab that. Soften it. Let's go back and do what we did the last time and switch our segments to 10 and run that again. And let's go up on the blue by 2. Yes, yes. And let's jump push pull again. And let's make sure we grab all of it, unsoften, and just zip this off. Bring a guide there, come down, grab that, and first let's get in, snap that guide, come to the corner, make sure we're hitting the intersection, grabbing that, and hide everything else here. Make sure I'm at the end point, so I'm actually cutting this. Now I can just grab that. Up that end, and should be able to do the same over here. Just gonna grab on this here and pull it out past. And oops. So let's grab the edge we made, cut it, get inside the group, paste it, and now we can zip that off. And we can do erase stray edges, delete guides. And there is our cat. For some reason this went down. Move this up, snap it to there. Let's grab that and soften that. And grab the top, let's pull that down 2 inches. Let's do the exact same technique. Let's grab these outer edges, let's offset them by 2 inches. Let's grab everything, triple click. Let's change this. We did 8 last time. And let's go with our shoe on the blue. Go up 2. Oops. And say yes and then no. Now we got that one in the group, so we can get inside. And we can double click and repeat our last joint push pull. Unsoften that. Do the same thing here. Bring back everything else. Just run an edge here. Now we can even draw from the line. Get on it out here, over to here, and grab that and zip that. Double click to get rid of that. Erase stray, delete guides, erase stray curves. Grab that, and group it, cut it, close it, delete that, paste in place, and delete guides. And there's our steps. Done. And let's bring back everything here. Check this, it's set to component. Let's get inside there. I'm just gonna reference this over here, speed this up. Just pulled that up, and now I'm gonna go normal push pull and come up, make sure that's on group. Set that to 3 inches. Get inside here, grab that, and go select quad face loops. So grab that edge, use my shortcut, and I'm going to go to joint push pull and joint push pull that by 2 inches. But I have that set to thickening. I'm going to turn, make sure that's not on thickening. Try that again to 2. There we go, and that should be good. Solid, solid. 2 groups. Now I'm going to take this inside of here. Make sure this is a component. Inside of here, and I'm going to take the top of this, copy it, close it, paste it, and then I want to offset, snap to this over here, and go to the outside, grab the middle, pull it up to match over there. Make sure that's a group and solid. Run my fix it to just be to double check, and I want to find center. Just going to use this add center point plugin that I have. Find center and pull up. The other option, I could instead use my move along or draw along, which will find a center point for me. Move up and snap it up to where it needs to be height-wise. Doesn't want to snap right. Use the regular tool and snap it over there. And I should convert this to an X line. Get out of that group. Just get that. There we go. Now I can move this up here. Snap that to there. And just kind of give me that indicator for the top. And now I can just go through and cheat a little bit just because I have this reference over here on the other side. And I just want to kind of get my top and bottom set up. And from here I can go through and pull this midpoint to midpoint, grab this edge here, and because I'm inside of the group, I'm going to cut back out of the group and paste that back in place. Move that over here, midpoint to midpoint. Make that one into a X line. I'm going to grab this here. I'm going to pull this up 10 inches. Yes, no, grab that, scale it, hold control, bring that out. Distance that I think that should be. And redraw this. I'm going to cheat a little bit for the sake of time and just get in here and grab this profile set of edges, copy them, close the group, and we get into this group. And I'm going to paste those in, hide everything else, and then I'm going to grab this and just move this over. And make sure I'm on the red and snap there. And snap it here. Select that, group it, delete it. Or before I do that, I may just grab that set and just mirror that across. Speed this up a little bit, create my little net option here. And that went too far because I mirrored from the bottom, and the bottom has a cut, so this edge isn't as long as the top. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to grab this from the top and come up, green and blue, and now that should drop right in there. Select that face, come over, select this face. Do last selection, see if I can get it again. Nope. So I forgot to group it before I deleted it, so group it, then delete it. And let's come out, let's say 2.5, 2.5. And I have this. I can grab it from the midpoint here, move this over and snap it to the construction line. And I have those. And take one, lift it up on the blue, drop that there. Use my move tool, rotate that around to minus 90 degrees, and the reference line here, find my midpoint here, move this and snap it to the midpoint here, and then delete this. So that's in the middle. I'm going to make this one unique. Actually, there's 3 in the model. I'm going to use that convert to components, then make this one unique. So there's one of those. Grab it, move it along this edge to here, and grab it and move it this way. Or instead of that, I maybe just do mirror. So find my midpoint on any one of these here, come up, come across, and have that mirror across. The only downside with mirror is now I can't do the array copy. So it's not the best thinking there. Do this and do 14 slash. And because these were a little thinner, I'm going to bring this in by 1 inch and 1 inch. See, we have some hard edges here, so I'm going to select all and bump up my softened edges a little bit. And the top's done. And now let's just do this one last little piece. These should all be components. Let me bring back everything else. Just grab this top and move it down, scale it in just a hair. Hold control while I do that, and double click in that face. Go to Add Center Point plugin. And just want to draw this edge down here. And convert that to a construction guide, just so it's there. And so I'm going to undo that, and I just want to grab that edge, and I'm going to do a that extrusion, edge extrusion, come over to here, and just leave it as a group. So we say no and no. So now it should be a group. Delete those guides. And now I can use this to draw my profile. So I'm going to go and try to remember it was something like this. Cross, come up, and like this. For that base, and that's way too small. Grab all these edges here. And scale up a little bit. So maybe I can find out where it is over here. And so I'm way off with that. I'm just going to try to cheat it here and see, maybe move this section over, grab these edges, maybe move them over, and just kind of grab that endpoint, move that over just a little bit, something like that. And then we had something here that was about out to the edge. It's going to come down. Eyeball this up. There's a ½ inch there. Come out to half circle. Come in just a hair. Come down. There. Make another one. So something like that. And then what we did last time, we used our draw Bezier curves, classic curve, snap to there, come down, snap to here, and we just kind of put that little bit of a bow in there. And actually undo that, start from the top, just come out to the edge. And then maybe somewhere in here, just come a little bit. Double click and pull this in a little bit. So way too much. Something like that. And actually get in there and edit that. It's still a little bit too much. I'm going to edit, and then I can still grab this point and pull it in. Something like that. Make this easier to see. Get rid of our group here, get rid of this extra edge. I'm going to take all of these edges and make sure there's no other edge gaps. Triple click on that. I'm going to weld them with Simplify to 0. And should have kept that midpoint there, but that's okay. Just going to grab here. Add a center point. I don't even need to draw a line. I could just grab this and go to my lathe option and find the center off of this point. Come down. And obviously that's the wrong direction, so let me try that again. Grab lathe, click there, and make sure I'm coming straight down. Whatever reason that is inside out, and so there's something off here. Just cut those and get out of the group, and paste those in here. Let me try this one more time. There we go. So that worked. It's 360, and I'm just going to double click, let that run through, make those edges, making the faces, and this should be done momentarily, and run through and make them into quads, reverse the faces, whatever you need to do from that point. So what's nice about these columns is you can really perfect them and then save them. You don't have to do this every time, but I'm just kind of showing the speed and using the tools and keyboard shortcuts. So yes, and yes, and no, and no. And I'm going to get in and manually adjust the smoothing here. Just turn on soften coplanar. And turn off the geometry. A little weird section in here. This looks like we created a secondary set of edges. I'm going to try to select only hard edges. Or deselect soft edges. Down here. Try to delete those. So for whatever reason I have an issue there that I didn't like with the Bezier tools, but that's okay. I'm just going to use something we've used already, and it's this edge extrude, and let's just come down here. No, and yes. Soften those. This edge with path select and soften that, and then just connect these two. I'm going to use something called Curvy Loft to do this, and we'll talk about this later, but it's just a really quick and easy way to do this. Just select both, and I'm going to run Curvy Loft. It's just going to make the junction there, and I'm going to take this down to 1. And this looks a little weird. I'm just going to grab this and scale this just a little bit. Curvy Loft is in a group, so I'm going to explode that first, and I can scale this out just a hair. Not too much. Scale that in. That's how it looks right visually, and try smoothing one more time. Turn that off and try to run fix it on this and clean that up for the most part, and now we're good to go. Smoothing there, and that's it. That'll take 20 minutes or so to build those elements, as opposed to what we did yesterday, and everything is good and clean. Should have, for the most part, all solid objects and solid groups, just like we went through yesterday. And you see that was not a solid. There's some issues remaining. Still not a solid. Keep trying to run that. And I'm going to run something called Solid Solver, and that's going to go through and try to fix some things that are wrong. I guess there were some duplicate faces or something went haywire with that lading operation. Try to run fix it again and really look at this. Try to maybe get inside and see what's going on here. I don't understand. This whole section here is really being weird, so we can get rid of that. And I'm just going to rebuild it. And select those, and select those. And I'm going to use this curvy loft again, which we are going to get into a lot. And then explode that. Now, I'm running Solid Solver and get inside here. So these lower pieces here are what's causing this, and these need to go for whatever reason. I don't even know why they're there. So besides this little tedious cleanup process, and which is really comes down to just me being anal more or less. Now we're solid. So they were kind of doing it all along, but because I export out of SketchUp into another software for my rendering, and because I am so particular with my rendering process and things that I do with rendering, not necessarily with a shape like this, but a lot of times I do displacement and things that really requires good solid clean geometry. So unsoften where it's not necessary, turn off hidden geometry, and now we should have a very nice clean surface. And those things that I just fixed, they don't show up in SketchUp generally. You can get away if you're just presenting this in SketchUp and it looks right visually in SketchUp, that's good enough if you're not rendering. But even out of SketchUp, if you use a render engine that's in SketchUp, ShaderLite, TheaRender, V-Ray for SketchUp, any one of those shading issues, those overlapping surfaces, they'll show up later, and you don't want to have to go through and spend an hour rendering something and come back and look at the render and see that it was screwed up. So this is just helping us to kind of, on the front end, making sure what we're doing is going to carry down the pipeline to the other end when we get into rendering and presentation and all that stuff. So these practices, this discipline of doing things right as we go through, and I'm not sure, something caused that. It was an issue with me, and something was wrong with my curve, the way I drew it. I almost feel like it wasn't flat. I feel like there was a piece that was maybe out a little bit, and it was causing it. It was out of plumb a little bit or something like that, and it could have been that Bezier tool, or that was the issue with that. So, but I quickly and easily went through and just used some tools and knowledge and shortcuts and fixed all that stuff. And just like that, we're right back to where we were yesterday, and we just rebuilt all those things. So now we're going to move on to some of the other core concepts, and we're going to get into extrusions along a path. I'm going to break that down, understand the theory behind that, talk about some plugins that'll do that and help speed up the workflow. I want to talk about in this lesson skinning and what skinning is all about, and how skinning is going to apply to creating our contours, or not our contours, but our terrain and things like that without having to use contour lines 100%, or if we use contour lines, how to get it, do that as efficiently as possible. And then I want to talk about something that is really important to understand, and that's the quad-based texturing workflow. And that's going to help explain why we go through the process of creating proper joints, and why we do some of the things we do with creating all the caps, the step treads, any wall cap, fire pit cap, pool coping, anything that comes along a curve which is going to have a jointed material in it, is going to require us to think about this workflow and understand why it works. And if we understand this, it'll carry back all the way to the 2D part of the cleanup when we're thinking ahead to the texturing. And I really think it's important that you understand how these techniques relate to things down the pipeline further. And we're going to try to break those down in a way that some of the stuff we did in lesson 1 and lesson 2 really start to click by the end of this lesson. And I wanted to start on our group project, but I've changed my mind on that. So I think it's more important that once we start the project and we're going through that we have all of these concepts down so that the things I'm talking about as we're doing the project, you can understand the terminology, you can understand why I'm going through the process this way. I want to make sure everything is laid out and crystal clear on the core concept and the fundamental side of the techniques that I'm teaching and the workflow that I've created here for landscape design. That when we are actually doing a landscape design project and converting it into 3D, that nobody is getting lost in the process and you're understanding exactly what the things I'm doing and where, what they're leading to. So as I'm talking about things, I want you to say, oh, I understand, because we went through that in a previous lesson. So I don't want to jump into that prematurely without feeling like everybody's up to speed on the core concepts. So I'm going to focus on that. We're going to get through these core concepts, whatever it takes. And then if we have to even finish out the training series with this group project that we're going to do, I think it's going to be better that if we have all the tools in our toolbox ahead of time, then we're better equipped to build this thing and to power through it. And this is kind of the grand finale. And we'll do that after the fact. And I was going to kind of put it in the middle and then tackle some things at the end, but I really want to go through these, and then we'll tackle all of it with that group project and finish out the training series with that. So let's move along, and I'm going to break here and split this into 2 videos. So this is the end of part 1 for lesson 3, and we'll see you in part 2 for lesson 3.